June 4, 1943, Norfolk Naval Base, Virginia. Unteroffizier Hermann Böttcher gripped the ship's railing as he descended the gangplank, his legs uncertain after 14 days at sea across the Atlantic. Through the pale morning haze, he witnessed something that contradicted 3 years of Nazi propaganda. American dock workers, white and black, labored side by side, surrounded by machinery that looked as if it belonged to another century. Women in overalls operated cranes with casual precision. Children hawked newspapers at the gates. No one recoiled at the sight of enemy uniforms. "Die Spinnen, die Amerikaner," he muttered to the man behind him. The Americans are insane. Böttcher would later record this moment in his memoir Behind Barbed Wire, published in West Germany in 1952, one of the most vivid first-hand accounts of POW life in the United States. The Norfolk base stretched across more than 4,000 acres, its piers vanishing into the distance, cranes in constant motion loading and unloading dozens of ships at once. In a single morning, this port handled more freight than Hamburg could manage in an entire week. But it wasn't the scale that stunned the arriving prisoners. It was the normalcy. Civilians strolled freely near military installations. Vendors sold coffee and donuts within view of warships. A brass band played swing tunes at a nearby war bond rally. On that day, 2,500 veterans of Rommel's Africa Corps stood in formation on American soil, the first major contingent of what would become over 425,000 German POWs held in the United States by war's end. What they witnessed over the coming months would challenge more than their expectations of American power. They would see something far more disquieting to a military mind, a nation at war that refused to behave like it, a society so confident in its strength that it treated sworn enemies like errant guests, and a people whose baffling customs and casual humanity would erode Nazi ideology more effectively than any battlefield defeat. Processing at Norfolk began with what Böttcher would later describe as the first impossibility. German doctrine, from Poland to North Africa, held that prisoners were either resources to exploit or burdens to discard. The Geneva Convention was obeyed when convenient, ignored when not. Yet here, American officers recited Geneva rules, in fluent German, explaining rights, asking about food preferences. According to International Red Cross records from June 1943, Jewish American personnel, including several sergeants with unmistakably Jewish surnames, distributed Red Cross parcels while noting that kosher meals were available for any Jewish prisoners. Some Wehrmacht soldiers laughed uneasily, assuming it was mockery. It wasn't. The U.S. Army had actually prepared for the religious needs of its captives. Medical inspections defied all logic. Wounded Germans received the same penicillin, the miracle drug scarcely available in German hospitals, as American servicemen. Swiss Red Cross Inspector Guy Matteau wrote in his July 1943 report, "Medical care provided to German POWs equals or surpasses that given to American personnel." Prisoners expressed disbelief at the quality of treatment. African American medics served alongside white counterparts in integrated units at Norfolk, though such integration was rare elsewhere in the U.S. military. One recorded case involved a black medical technician drawing blood from Wehrmacht officers for standard health screening, an act that, under Nazi law, would have been criminal. Here, it was simply routine. The greatest shock came during their first meal. The German POWs were escorted into a mess hall where American sailors were already dining. The two groups, men who had tried to kill each other in convoy battles, ate in the same hall, Americans at one end, Germans at the other, sharing the same food lines and the same quality of meals. The Americans showed no particular interest, more focused on a radio broadcast of a baseball game than on their enemies sitting 50 feet away. The 3-day train journey to camps in the interior provided the next level of cognitive dissonance. Unlike the secretive prisoner movements in Germany, American authorities made no attempt to hide the PSWs. The trains, not boxcars, but actual passenger coaches with cushioned seats, stopped at regular stations where civilians gathered to observe. At Union Station in Washington, D.C., witnessed by hundreds and documented in station logs from June 1943, German prisoners watched American families seeing off soldiers headed to training camps. Wives kissed husbands goodbye in public. Children waved flags. Teenagers shared milkshakes at the station restaurant. The same platform hosted enemies and families, separated only by windows and guards who seemed more interested in directing traffic than watching prisoners. The trains passed through industrial areas that should have been camouflaged, hidden, protected. Instead, factories displayed their names in huge letters. The Glenn L. Martin Aircraft Plant in Baltimore had parking lots visible from the train filled with workers' personal automobiles. Prisoners could count the B-26 bombers lined up for delivery. No attempt at concealment, no security paranoia, just American industry operating in plain sight of enemies. Through Pennsylvania, the trains passed coal mines and steel mills running continuous shifts. The night sky glowed orange from blast furnaces that never stopped. Workers' housing, individual houses with gardens, not barracks, spread for miles around each industrial complex. Electric lights burned in every window. Radio antennas sprouted from every roof. At a stop in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, documented in Pennsylvania Railroad records, German officers watched American workers at shift change. Men carrying lunch boxes, wearing leather shoes and wristwatches, driving personal vehicles. According to Böttcher's memoir, one worker threw away a half-eaten apple and opened a fresh one from his lunchbox. The casual waste of food by a laborer stunned officers who had seen their men fight over scraps in Africa. Camp Hearn, Texas, opened in December 1942 on 720 acres near the town of Hernan, Robertson County. Military records show it would house up to 4,800 German prisoners in conditions that exceeded what most had known as civilians. The camp's construction and operation are thoroughly documented in Army Corps of Engineers records and War Department files at the National Archives. At the very layout of the camp defied German assumptions about how prisoners of war were treated. Wooden barracks were fitted with electric lighting instead of smoky oil lamps, and indoor plumbing with flush toilets and hot water heaters replaced crude latrines. Each man slept in an individual bed with a real mattress, clean sheets, and wool blankets, not on straw or bare boards. Recreation halls contained ping-pong tables, musical instruments, and small libraries. Swiss inspector Emil Sandstrom recorded in his August 1943 assessment, "Conditions at Camp Hearn exceed Geneva Convention standards and are, in many cases, better than those experienced by these men in Germany." The camp commander, Lieutenant Colonel Cecil Stiles, whose service record still survives in military archives, addressed the prisoners directly, in fluent German. He had studied the language at university before the war. Stiles not only outlined camp regulations but introduced something unheard of in German military culture. The prisoners would be allowed to govern themselves within the compound. They could elect spokesmen, organize their own events, and manage daily routines within limits set by the U.S. Army. To many Germans, this was either a sign of dangerous leniency or an elaborate deception. The camp hospital, inspected monthly by the International Red Cross, was equally bewildering. It contained modern medical equipment, X-ray units, surgical suites, dental chairs, and stocked pharmacies, items rare even in German civilian hospitals. The miracle drug penicillin was administered freely. When prisoner Georg Gärtner, later known as the last German POW to surrender in 1985, suffered an acute appendicitis in September 1943, he underwent successful surgery within hours, performed by Captain William Calhoun, an Army surgeon from Dallas, assisted by trained German prisoner medics. Even more shocking to the newcomers was the camp canteen, a store where prisoners could buy items using coupons earned from voluntary labor. Cigarettes, chocolate, soap, writing materials, musical instruments, and art supplies lined the shelves. War Department policy, documented in Quartermaster Corps files, encouraged such comforts as a way to maintain morale and reduce escape attempts. The notion that enemy soldiers could shop, choose what to buy, and enjoy luxuries beyond survival defied everything they had been taught. By late 1943, Growing labor shortages led to the deployment of POW workers across Texas. In coordination with the War Manpower Commission and the Provost Marshal General's Office, prisoners were assigned to agricultural and non-military jobs, earning 80 cents per day in canteen script equal to an American private's base pay. Detailed records of these programs remain preserved in National Archives Record Group 389. At the King Ranch near Kingsville, Texas, prisoners confronted the staggering scale of American agriculture. The ranch spanned over 825,000 acres, larger than the state of Rhode Island. Work logs from 1943 to 1945 show German POWs laboring beside Mexican-American vaqueros and black ranch hands. Though social boundaries remained, the racial integration of work crews upended Nazi beliefs about racial hierarchy. Letters home, carefully censored but still revealing, described their amazement at American mechanization. A single combine harvester replaced dozens of workers. Trucks replaced horse-drawn carts. Small civilian aircraft were used to monitor cattle herds. Ranch foreman Richard Kleberg, Jr. treated German prisoners as temporary employees, not enemies. In cotton processing centers across Texas, in Taylor, Caldwell, and Waller counties, POWs saw production speeds they once thought impossible. At the Hearn Cotton Oil Mill, where prisoners worked from August 1943 to December 1945, daily output exceeded what German textile mills achieved in a month. Yet the Americans took regular breaks, ate full meals, and even listened to radios while they worked. The idea that productivity could come from good treatment, not fear, overturned everything the Wehrmacht had taught them. Reports from the FBI, declassified in the 1970s, describe POW's astonishment at hearing American farmers openly criticize President Roosevelt and government policies without punishment. In one instance, near Bryan, Texas, a farmer told a Department of Agriculture inspector to go to hell during a dispute and faced no consequences. Such defiance would have meant execution in Nazi Germany. Local newspapers throughout Texas chronicled the curious coexistence between captured Germans and ordinary American civilians. A quiet, everyday front in the ideological war they had already lost. The Hearn Democrat, Bryan Daily Eagle, and Temple Daily Telegram all ran stories about P-work details and community interactions. These contemporary accounts provide verification of social encounters that stunned military prisoners. In December 1943, the Hearn Democrat reported German PSWs on supervised Christmas shopping outings witnessing American teenage culture. Young people gathered at drugstore soda fountains, boys and girls together unchaperoned. They danced to jukebox music, including jazz and swing that Nazi ideology labeled degenerate Negro music. They dressed in fashionable clothes despite wartime, showing no militarization of youth culture. American women's behavior particularly stunned the prisoners. Women drove trucks for the Hearn Cotton Oil Mill, operated businesses along Main Street, supervised male workers in defense plants. At nearby Bryan Army Airfield, part of the Women Air Force Service Pilots WP program, female pilots flew military aircraft. Military records confirm WASPs operated from Bryan Field from 1943 to 1944. Visible to P work details in surrounding areas. Churches throughout Robertson County invited German prisoners to services. Church records from First Baptist Church of Hearn, First Methodist Church, and St. Mary's Catholic Church all document German P attendance at services. The December 24, 1943, Hearn Democrat reported, German prisoners attended Christmas Eve services at multiple churches, sitting among congregation members whose sons serve overseas. No incidents reported. By early 1944, the Special Projects Division of the Prost Marshal General's Office had established sophisticated educational operations at Camp Hearn. Declassified records from Record Group 389 reveal the extent of this secret education program, though prisoners only knew it as voluntary education. The camp library, initially stocked with 500 books donated by Hearn citizens, grew to over 5,000 volumes by August 1944. The American Library Association's Books for Prisoners program provided texts, including works by German authors banned by the Nazis. Thomas Mann's The Magic Mountain, Erich Maria Remarque as All Quiet on the Western Front, and works by Jewish authors like Lion Feuerwenger were available. A German P could read books that would have meant death to possess in Nazi Germany. Sam Houston State Teachers College, now Sam Houston State University, provided correspondence courses. College records show 340 German PSWs enrolled in courses including English, American history, mathematics, and agricultural science between 1944 to 1945. Professors from the college visited Camp Herne monthly to conduct lectures and examinations. The camp newspaper situation requires clarification. While De Roof was indeed published at Fort Kearny, Rhode Island, Camp Herne prisoners published their own newspaper called Despise, The Mirror, not to be confused with the later German news magazine. Copies preserved in the Army Heritage and Education Center show evolution from Nazi propaganda. In early 1943, additions to democratic discussions by late 1944, declassified Special Projects Division documents, reveal sophisticated psychological operations. The program identified 3 categories of prisoners: anti-Nazis, approximately 10%, non-political prisoners, 75%, and ardent Nazis, 15%. Each group received different treatment designed to maximize ideological transformation. Anti-Nazi prisoners identified through careful screening, including analysis of letters, conversations, and reading choices, received additional privileges and education. They became barracks leaders, discussion group moderators, and newspaper editors. Their influence on non-political prisoners was carefully cultivated and monitored. The screening process developed by Army psychologists and German immigrant advisors included subtle tests, prisoners' reactions to news of German defeats, their book choices from libraries, their participation in educational programs, and their social interactions were all documented. Weekly reports tracked ideological shifts across the camp population. Assistant Executive Officer Major Maxwell McKnight, whose papers are preserved at the Hoover Institution, wrote in a November 1944 report, "The transformation rate exceeds expectations. Approximately 60% of non-political prisoners show measurable movement toward democratic ideals after 6 months of exposure to American society and targeted education. Working in American facilities exposed PWs to casual abundance that seemed like mockery of German scarcity. At the Alcoa aluminum plant in Rockdale, Texas, where PS handled materials from September 1943 onward, workers discarded more aluminum scrap in a day than German aircraft factories could acquire in a week. Plant records show German PSWs were assigned to scrap collection, giving them direct exposure to American industrial waste. Food processing plants provided the most psychological shock. At the Stokely Brothers Cannery in Cameron, Texas, verified through Milne County historical records as employing PWs from nearby Camp Herne, perfectly edible produce was discarded for minor cosmetic flaws. Tomatoes slightly underripe, corn with irregular kernels, beans with minor blemishes, all destroyed while German civilians faced starvation. A letter from P. Corporal Friedrich Müller, preserved in Red Cross archives, stated, "Today, we destroyed hundreds of pounds of fruit because it did not meet canning standards. Fruit that would be treasure in Germany is garbage here. The American supervisor apologized to us for the waste, not understanding that he was apologizing for abundance we couldn't imagine." Christmas 1943 at Camp Herne is extensively documented in local newspapers, Red Cross reports, and military records. The entire town of Herne, population 2,000, mobilized to ensure enemy prisoners had a proper Christmas celebration. This response to enemies contradicted every expectation of wartime behavior. The Herne Democrat published a full list of donations on December 23, 1943. Local churches collected 4,800 individual gift packages. Schools contributed handmade cards and decorations. The American Legion Post 164 Veterans of World War I who had fought Germans donated cigarettes, candy, and sports equipment to current German enemies. The Lions Club provided musical instruments. The Garden Club decorated the camp with holly and evergreen boughs. The camp Christmas tree, photographed for the newspaper, stood 30 feet tall in the main compound, decorated with electric lights that burned continuously. Quartermaster records show the camp used more electricity for Christmas decorations than most German villages had for all purposes. Such electrical display would be unthinkable even in peacetime Germany. Local churches performed Christmas concerts in German for the prisoners. The First Methodist Church Choir learned German Christmas carols phonetically. Mrs. Sarah Patterson, the choir director whose son was serving in Italy, led the performance. The cognitive dissonance of American mothers singing to enemy soldiers while their sons fought Germans broke several prisoners emotionally. According to Guard reports, the Christmas feast menu preserved in quartermaster records included roast turkey, 1 pound per man, ham, candied sweet potatoes, green beans, cornbread stuffing, cranberry sauce, mince pie, apple pie, ice cream, beer for enlisted men, California wine for officers. The meal totaled approximately 5,000 calories per person. Meanwhile, German civilian rations, when available, provided 1,200 calories daily. Working in Texas exposed German PSWs to American racial dynamics that contradicted both Nazi propaganda and American reputation. The reality documented in military reports and local newspapers was more complex than either narrative suggested. At Camp Hearn, Negro soldiers from the 359th Infantry Regiment occasionally served guard duty. German PSWs, products of Nazi racial ideology, found themselves taking orders from Black Americans. Several prisoners requested transfers rather than submit to Negro authority, requests denied by camp administration. Lieutenant Colonel Stiles stated in a December 1943 report, "German prisoner objections to Negro guards are noted and ignored. Yet prisoners also witness segregation's contradictions. They could eat in Hearn restaurants that refused service to the Negro soldiers guarding them. They could attend movie theaters where their guards couldn't sit in the main section. German enemies had more social freedom in some contexts than American citizens who happened to be black. This paradox, being treated better than some Americans while being enemies, scrambled ideological certainty at agricultural work sites documented in Farm Security Administration records. Prisoners worked alongside Mexican-American and Negro laborers. The efficiency of mixed-race work crews when focused on tasks rather than race challenged Nazi theories about racial purity equaling productivity. German PWs picked cotton alongside black workers who outperformed them, undermining assumptions of racial superiority. 3 well-documented cases illustrate the transformation of German PWs in America. Hermann Böttcher arrived at Camp Hearn in June 1943 as a convinced Nazi. His memoir describes gradual ideological collapse through accumulated observations. The turning point came Christmas 1943 when Hearn citizens gave presents to enemy prisoners. He wrote, "These people whose sons we had tried to kill gave us gifts. Their kindness wasn't weakness but strength. The confidence of victors who knew they had already won not just the war, but the peace that would follow." But immigrated to America in 1953, became a citizen in 1958, and worked as an engineer for General Motors until retirement. Georg Gärtner escaped from Camp Deming, New Mexico in September 1945, living under the assumed name Dennis Wiles for 40 years. Rather than fleeing the country, he chose to remain in America illegally, marrying an American woman, raising children, working as a tennis instructor in California. When he finally surrendered in 1985 for a television documentary, he'd been American longer than German. His story, documented in his autobiography, Hitler's Last Soldier in America, validates the transformative power of American society. Reinhold Pabel escaped from Camp Washington, Illinois in 1945, not from mistreatment, but from boredom and curiosity about American life. According to his memoir, Enemies Are Human, he lived illegally in Chicago for 7 years, working in bookstores, marrying an American woman before voluntarily surrendering in 1953. The FBI investigation revealed he had broken no laws except illegal entry. He received citizenship in 1959 and became a successful businessman, later sponsoring other German immigrants. The German P experience varied across America's 500-plus camps, but consistent patterns emerged. Camp Alva, Oklahoma specialized in agricultural training. Department of Agriculture records show German PS managed a 200-acre demonstration farm using American techniques. Prisoners learned mechanical cultivation, crop rotation, soil conservation, and hybrid seed development. These skills proved invaluable when PWs returned to devastated Germany. The camp's agricultural program was so successful that local farmers hired P-work crews at premium wages, creating competition for prisoner labor. Camp Concordia, Kansas, became renowned for its art program. German prisoners of war created murals that still exist in Stone County Courthouse and several local buildings. The camp orchestra, equipped with instruments donated by Kansas communities, performed concerts for civilian audiences. The Concordia Blade newspaper reviewed these concerts favorably, noting the professional quality of enemy musicians. Art created by prisoners now forms permanent collections in Kansas museums. Camp Trinidad, Colorado, faced unique challenges with winter temperatures reaching -20°. F. Quartermaster records show the Army provided German PS with Arctic-grade clothing, insulated barracks, and increased caloric rations. 4,000 calories daily in winter, Swiss Inspector Andre. Poncho noted in February 1944, German prisoners at Trinidad receive better winter provisions than Wehrmacht troops on the Eastern Front, according to prisoners' own admissions. Perhaps nothing stunned German military minds more than American information transparency. Prisoners had access to American newspapers that criticized the war effort, revealed production problems, discussed strategic failures. The Special Projects Division deliberately provided diverse news sources, knowing that exposure to free press would undermine totalitarian thinking. Radio programs accessible in recreation halls featured commentary critical of military leadership. Comedians like Bob Hope mocked generals and politicians. Journalists like Edward R. Murrow questioned strategies. Congress debated military appropriations publicly with dissenting opinions broadcast nationally. All of this was accessible to enemy prisoners. The 1944 presidential election campaign observed from camps seemed like democratic suicide to German military minds. Roosevelt faced serious challenge from Thomas Dewey during wartime. Republicans criticized war management. Newspapers published opposition views. Political cartoons mocked the commander-in-chief. Yet the war effort continued, even strengthened. This demonstration of democracy's strength through discord, rather than despite it, fundamentally challenged authoritarian assumptions. International Red Cross inspection reports available in ICRC archives in Geneva consistently rated American P camps above Geneva Convention requirements. These neutral assessments provide crucial verification of camp conditions. Inspector Guy Metro wrote in his August 1944 comprehensive report, American camps exceed treaty requirements in all categories. Food rations equal or surpass American military rations. Medical care is equivalent to American military hospitals. Educational and recreational opportunities exceed many American military training facilities. Specific inspection findings from Camp Hearn include caloric intake 3,300 to 3,800 calories daily. Geneva Convention required 2,000. Living space 40 FT per man. Convention required 27. Medical staff 1 doctor per 500 prisoners. Convention required 1 per 1,000. Recreation, organized sports, libraries, educational programs. Convention required adequate recreation. Inspector Emil Sandstrom compared American camps favorably to other nations. Having inspected P facilities in Canada, Britain, and Australia, I can state definitively that American camps provide superior conditions. The distinction is not just material but philosophical. Americans treat prisoners as temporarily displaced persons rather than enemies. PS working in American factories observed production methods that revolutionized their understanding of industrial efficiency. At the Lonier Steel Plant in Dangerfield, Texas, where PS from Camp Hearn worked from 1944 to 1945, monthly production exceeded the entire Ruhr Valley's annual output before Allied bombing. The secret wasn't just machinery, but motivation. Company records show workers competed for production bonuses, suggested efficiency improvements, took pride in output. Charts displayed each shift's production like sports scores. Workers wore company pins, bought war bonds with overtime pay, painted bomber names on steel designated for military use. Morale drove productivity more than supervision. At Texas railroad yards, where PWS loaded materials, the coordination astounded German logistics officers. The Missouri-Kansas-Texas Railroad employed PWs at its Smithville yard, where prisoners witnessed American logistics efficiency. Trains arrived on precise schedules. Loading equipment operated continuously. Telegraph and telephone systems coordinated nationwide transport. No central planning committee, just capitalism organizing itself for war production. As Germany collapsed in spring 1945, American authorities prepared prisoners for return to a destroyed homeland. This preparation, documented in occupation planning records, exceeded simple repatriation. The War Department initiated Project Paperclip for scientists, but also broader programs preparing PSWs to rebuild democratic Germany. Courses in civil administration prepared PSWs for managing destroyed cities. Agricultural training emphasized feeding starving populations. Medical personnel learned public health techniques for epidemic prevention. Engineers studied infrastructure reconstruction. The Special Projects Division identified potential democratic leaders among prisoners, providing additional training in governance and administration. The scope of preparation is documented in Prost-Marshall General Reports. By May 1945, 31,000 prisoners of war enrolled in vocational training, 18,000 studying English, 12,000 in agricultural programs, 8,500 in technical courses, 200 in business administration. Future Marshall Plan concepts were explained to prisoners before public announcement. State Department officials visited camps explaining American intentions to rebuild rather than punish Germany. This incomprehensible generosity from victor to vanquished shattered final remnants of Nazi ideology about racial struggle and survival of the fittest. The numbers document the transformation's scope. Of 425,000 German PS in America, only 2,222 escape attempts occurred, 0.52% in only 54 successful escapes for more than 30 days, 0.01% sabotage incidents, 7 confirmed cases, 0.01%, work refusals, 178 documented incidents, 0.04%, voluntary labor participation, 87% of eligible prisoners. Post-war surveys conducted by American occupation authorities found 74% of returned PSWs held favorable views of American democracy. 61% supported Marshall Plan aid when announced. 55% advocated German-American alliance. 38% expressed desire to immigrate to America. 23% maintained correspondence with American families. Immigration records show 5,000 former PWs legally immigrated to America in the 1950s. Naturalization records indicate 92% became citizens within eligible time frame. Their American success rate measured by employment, home ownership, and lack of criminal records exceeded general immigrant populations. The influence of returned PWS on West German Reconstruction is documented in occupation records and German archives. Former PWs occupied significant positions in the new democracy. 48 became Bundestag members. 312 served as mayors or city councilors. 1847 worked in agricultural modernization. 441 taught in reconstituted schools. 4,165 managed businesses using American methods. Hans Georg von Studnitz, former P and later German industrialist, told American historians in 1965, "We returned from America with more than memories. We brought knowledge of how democracy functions, how free markets operate, how diverse peoples cooperate. We had seen the future, and we knew it worked." Camp Hearn closed in December 1945, but connections endured. The Hearn Heritage League maintains archives of correspondence from former PWs spanning 40 years. Christmas cards arrived annually until the last known prisoner died in 2001. These letters document sustained transformation rather than temporary influence. In 1984, the 40th anniversary of D-Day, the former Camp Hearn PWS returned to Texas. The Hearn Democrat covered their union extensively. Former enemies embraced former guards. Wehrmacht veterans placed flowers at the American Legion Memorial. Fritz Zimmermann, speaking for the group, said, "We came as enemies believing in racial superiority and national destiny. We left as friends understanding that democracy's chaos is its strength, that diversity creates rather than weakens unity." Historians have extensively documented the German P experience in America. Arnold Kramer's Nazi Prisoners of War in America. 1979 provides comprehensive documentation. Judith Gansberg's Stalag USA 1977 analyzes the re-education program. Antonio Thompson's Men in German Uniform 2010 examines P labor programs. Ron Robbins' The Barbed Wire College 1995 details educational transformation. These academic works based on archives, interviews, and government records confirm the transformation's scope and success. Theanine. General consensus holds that America's treatment of German POWs remains history's most effective form of re-education, achieved not through indoctrination, but through exposure. The German prisoners who arrived in the United States between 1943 and 1946 encountered scenes that defied everything their upbringing had taught them. Every act of casual freedom, each unexpected kindness, and every gesture of generosity gradually dismantled their old beliefs. They anticipated finding a fractured and feeble nation. Instead, they encountered a country so secure in its strength that it could extend compassion even to its foes. The transformation occurred not through speeches or propaganda, but through lived experience. German captives saw democracy thriving amid what looked like disorder. They witnessed racial progress moving forward despite lingering segregation. They observed women leading and commanding respect while preserving grace and dignity. They experienced enemies becoming companions through nothing more than shared humanity. What Americans viewed as ordinary, their freedom, imperfections, and contradictions, struck the prisoners as extraordinary revelations. These experiences achieved what military defeat alone could not: a profound ideological rebirth. The German POWs didn't merely see American power, they felt its moral foundation. They didn't just study democracy, they took part in it. America's truest victory wasn't fought on the front lines, but within the walls of its prison camps, where foes turned into believers through the simple power of example. What shocked the Germans were everyday scenes to Americans, untidy, flawed, yet unmistakably free. The men who had come expecting enemies instead found reflections of their own potential. Those moments of revelation changed not only individuals, but the destiny of nations. In their astonished understanding were planted the seeds of the Atlantic Alliance, the Marshall Plan, and the democratic rebirth of Europe. Their story stands as proof that the most enduring triumphs come not from force, but from example. Not through hatred, but through humanity.